the chamber fell silent. Karoline Leavitt, clutching her papers as though they were a lifeline, stepped toward the microphone. Her voice cracked, trembled, and then broke. "Please, drop the lawsuit." The plea, raw and unpolished, sliced through the air of the congressional chamber like a splinter. Members shifted in their seats, some averting their eyes, others leaning forward with the eagerness of spectators in a courtroom drama about to tilt on its axis. It wasn't just a request. It was surrender disguised as civility, a calculated retreat masked as compromise. Everyone in that chamber could hear it, the sound of power slipping from the grasp of someone who had once strutted with certainty. Karoline Leavitt wasn't leading now. She was begging. And across the room sat Jasmine Crockett, immovable, eyes steady, the embodiment of stillness. She did not flinch. She did not soften. Crockett's composure carried the weight of something larger than herself, as though the silence of every immigrant mother who had ever been told to know her place, every working American who had ever been dismissed, was now gathered in her gaze. The contrast was almost unbearable. On one side, desperation. On the other, dignity sharpened into steel. The walls themselves seemed to absorb the tension. Even the marble pillars felt like they were leaning in, waiting. Staffers held their breath. Cameras rolled, catching every quiver of Leavitt's lips, every glint of unspoken calculation in Crockett's stare. And then, in that cavernous hall where arrogance had so often echoed unchecked, Jasmine Crockett spoke. Her reply was not loud. It didn't need to be. Cold, cutting, precise, it froze Congress in its tracks. A single sentence that carried the sting of finality, a rebuke so clean that it sounded almost rehearsed by history itself. You could feel it ripple instantly. The shift. The unmasking. The balance of power changing hands in real time. Crockett's words weren't just an answer, they were an indictment, a line carved deep into the story of that day. But this was only the beginning. Because the words Crockett delivered next would ricochet through America like a thunderclap. ChatGPT said. Section 2, raise the stakes, 600 words. This was never just about numbers on paper. $80 million, a figure so staggering that it seemed ripped from a corporate scandal, not the chamber of Congress. But here it was, hanging in the air like a political nuke, armed and ticking. Everyone knew it. If the lawsuit detonated, the blast radius would scorch more than Karoline Leavitt's bank account. It would torch her reputation, her career, and the very credibility she had built brick by brick in the public eye. For Leavitt, the stakes couldn't be higher. She had styled herself as the fresh, fearless conservative voice ready to duel with Washington insiders. She had courted headlines, picked fights, and basked in the attention that comes with controversy. But attention is a double-edged sword. The moment you stumble, the moment you reveal weakness, that spotlight doesn't flatter, it burns. And in that chamber, under Crockett's unyielding gaze, Leavitt's armor cracked. Her begging plea wasn't just about dodging a financial penalty. It was about saving face, clawing back dignity before it slipped through her fingers forever. And yet, for Jasmine Crockett, the stakes were no less daunting. She could have played it safe, softened her tone, offered the kind of compromise that wins polite applause but changes nothing. Instead, she stood on a razor's edge. One wrong move, and the headlines would come crashing down on her, too harsh. Vindictive. Out of touch. Every black woman in politics knows this double bind: stand firm, and you're painted as angry. Show compassion, and you're branded weak. Crockett's choice in that moment was not just about whether to pursue a lawsuit. It was about whether she would accept the role America too often assigns, to yield, to forgive, to let power off the hook. But Crockett wasn't playing their game. She understood the deeper truth: this wasn't about $80 million. It was about exposing a system where arrogance thrived unchecked, where rules bent for the privileged but snapped against the vulnerable. And by holding her ground, she wasn't just speaking for herself. She was speaking for millions who had never been given a microphone, who had swallowed injustice in silence. The chamber buzzed with unspoken fear. What if Crockett didn't back down? What if this lawsuit went forward, and the court forced every ugly detail into the light? The whisper of scandal loomed over Leavitt like a shadow too dark to shake. Colleagues who once clapped her on the back now looked at her sideways, calculating how close they could afford to stand when the blast came. That's why this clash mattered. Because it wasn't merely Crockett versus Leavitt. It was dignity versus desperation. Justice versus self-preservation. And as every camera in that chamber zoomed in, as social media feeds lit up in real time, it became clear America wasn't just watching. America was choosing. This wasn't going to fade into a forgotten headline. This was a power struggle that would reveal the true balance in Congress, who bent, who broke, and who stood tall when the pressure threatened to crush them all. And to understand why Leavitt was cornered, you need to know the full story behind this $80 million time bomb. Karoline Leavitt had built her brand on audacity. To her supporters, she was the unapologetic disruptor, the 20-something conservative firebrand who clawed her way into the national spotlight with sheer bravado and loyalty to the party line. She wasn't content to be a footnote in someone else's speech. She wanted the microphone, the headlines, the drama. And for a while, it worked. Her rise was meteoric, the kind of ascent political consultants like to package into sound bites. A small-town girl with sharp elbows, she leaned hard into partisan loyalty, defending her chosen party's leaders with unflinching zeal. Every media firestorm was an opportunity, not a danger. When cable news needed a brash voice to rile up a debate panel, Leavitt delivered. When talk radio wanted a quote dripping with disdain for the opposition, she was on the line. She thrived on the friction. Her currency wasn't policy nuance, it was conflict. But that hunger for the spotlight came at a price. With every viral clip, with every fiery takedown, she built not only her profile but also her list of enemies. She dismissed critics as irrelevant. She brushed off colleagues who advised caution. To her, arrogance wasn't a liability, it was armor. She projected strength by speaking louder, cutting deeper, refusing to back down even when she was cornered. Yet that very stubbornness, the same trait that launched her career, also blinded her to the quiet dangers building around her. Behind the headlines, contradictions festered. She wore the image of toughness like a badge, calling herself resilient, unshakable. But the courtroom doesn't bend to talking points, and Congress doesn't always play by the script. The same voice that once commanded television studios cracked when forced to beg in front of peers. The same figure who projected dominance suddenly looked small, exposed, and human. For the first time, the spotlight didn't make her shine, it revealed her desperation. Leavitt had spent years branding herself as the strong one, the fighter who would never flinch. But in that chamber, facing an $80 million lawsuit, the image collapsed. Her eyes darted for allies who suddenly weren't there. Her words faltered under the weight of stakes too large for spin. In that instant, the contradictions could not be ignored, the fearless voice reduced to pleading, the unyielding figure bending at the knee. And that's what made this moment so powerful. The fall wasn't just financial, it was symbolic. Leavitt's political persona was built on the idea that strength meant noise, the louder you shouted, the more powerful you appeared. But true power was about something quieter, something steadier. And when tested, her brand of strength dissolved under pressure. To the public, watching from phones, tablets, and living rooms across America, it was a jarring reversal. The woman who had once laughed off critics, who had rolled her eyes at questions of accountability, was suddenly the one pleading for mercy. She had chased the spotlight for years, and now the spotlight betrayed her, illuminating the cracks she had fought so hard to hide. But here's the cruel irony, in politics, collapse doesn't happen all at once. It's not one moment, one headline, one loss. It's a slow unraveling, credibility fraying thread by thread until, suddenly, the whole fabric gives way. For Karoline Leavitt, the lawsuit wasn't just a legal challenge. It was the unraveling. And so, in that chamber, she stood not as the loud, confident disruptor but as the humbled politician staring down consequences too large to spin. The contrast was electric. Her career had been built on drama, but she had never imagined she would become the drama, the one caught begging, the one stripped of her shield of arrogance. This is why the chamber fell silent that day. Not because America hadn't seen politicians stumble before, but because the fall of someone who branded herself as untouchable revealed something deeper about the fragility of performative power. It showed that noise can only carry you so far. But across the aisle, Jasmine Crockett was shaped by a very different path, one that made her immune to political theatrics. Jasmine Crockett's journey was never about shortcuts or spectacle. Where others found fame by courting controversy, she carved her path through grit, discipline, and an unshakable belief in dignity. She didn't come from privilege or political dynasties. She came from the school of survival, balancing the weight of expectation with the realities of struggle. Every step of her rise was earned the hard way, and that's what made her different. From a young age, Crockett understood resilience not as an abstract value, but as a daily necessity. She faced the skepticism that often shadows Black women in leadership, the quiet dismissals, the raised eyebrows, the subtle underestimations. Each time, she answered not with theatrics, but with results. Her calm wasn't silence, it was strategy. While others shouted to be heard, Crockett mastered the art of patience, waiting for the right moment, then striking with precision. Her early career in law forged this discipline. Day after day in courtrooms, she witnessed how power often disguised itself, in tone, in wealth, in arrogance. And yet, she learned to cut through the noise. She wasn't the loudest voice in the room, but the one juries trusted, the one clients leaned on when the stakes were life-changing. Those courtrooms became her training ground, teaching her how to keep composure even when storms raged around her. When she made the leap into politics, many thought she'd bend under the weight of the national stage. But Crockett thrived. She spoke not in riddles or slogans, but in truths. She didn't need to shout to be heard because her presence commanded attention. While others postured for the cameras, Crockett anchored herself in authenticity. She knew that real leadership wasn't about chasing the spotlight, it was about standing steady when the lights burned hottest. Her rise to Congress wasn't the story of a flashy newcomer crashing the scene. It was the story of someone who had spent years building credibility brick by brick. She wasn't handed her platform, she built it with discipline, resilience, and a quiet refusal to be dismissed. That's why, when she entered the halls of power, she carried herself differently. Not arrogant, not timid, but dignified. Calm. Unshaken. And yet, beneath that calm was steel. Crockett wasn't one to provoke, but if provoked, she struck back with a force that left opponents stunned. She had no patience for condescension, no tolerance for arrogance dressed up as authority. When dismissed, she didn't grovel, she responded. When attacked, she didn't panic, she cut through with clarity. Her strength wasn't in noise, but in the ability to silence noise. That's why her constituents trusted her. That's why her colleagues, even those across the aisle, learned to respect her. She embodied a kind of leadership rare in Washington, a balance of compassion and backbone, a refusal to be either caricatured or controlled. For people who felt unseen, unheard, or disrespected, Crockett became a symbol. A reminder that dignity could still stand tall in the halls of chaos. To her progressive supporters, she wasn't just a lawmaker, she was proof. Proof that resilience wins. Proof that composure in the face of chaos isn't weakness, it's strength. Proof that when arrogance collides with dignity, dignity can prevail. Watching her rise, many found themselves rooting not just for her, but for what she represented, a politics that didn't need to scream to be powerful. And this is what made the clash with Karoline Leavitt so electrifying. On one side, the loud voice, desperate to hold on to a crumbling image. On the other, the calm presence who had nothing to prove, because her record spoke for itself. For Leavitt, the lawsuit was a threat to everything she had built. For Crockett, it was an opportunity, not for revenge, but for justice. She knew the cameras were rolling. She knew the country was watching. But she also knew something deeper, that the moment wasn't about theatrics, it was about truth. And when truth is on your side, composure isn't just possible, it's inevitable. So when the plea came, when Karoline Leavitt's voice cracked and her mask of strength fell away, Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't fumble. She didn't let the weight of the chamber or the glare of the cameras shake her resolve. Because Crockett wasn't rattled. She was ready. The chamber was suffocating with tension. Karoline Leavitt's words, once sharp with confidence, now came out jagged, desperate, almost pleading. Her polished bravado, the image she had built of an untouchable fighter, slipped with every syllable. "Please," she whispered at first, her voice quivering, "please, this lawsuit, it's destroying me. My reputation, my future, it's all on the line. Drop it. I'm begging you." Her tone cracked like thin glass under pressure. The woman who once stood as a defiant firebrand now looked fragile, her carefully built armor peeling away in real time. She tried to summon her old force, repeating herself with more urgency, but each repetition only revealed her unraveling. $80 million? No one survives that. You know it's not fair. You know it's not right. You have the power to stop this, so stop it. But Jasmine Crockett said nothing. She didn't even shift in her seat. She simply stared, calm and steady, her silence louder than any speech. The pause between Leavitt's cries and Crockett's stillness stretched long, unbearable. Every second was like a hammer strike. Each moment of restraint added weight to the air. The silence wasn't empty, it was crushing. Around the chamber, the discomfort grew. Members shifted in their seats, exchanged uneasy glances, whispered under their breath. Was this really happening? Was Karoline Leavitt, the relentless conservative fighter, truly reduced to begging? Murmurs swelled, like a tide rising in the corners of the room. The spectacle was no longer just between two women, it was pulling in the entire chamber, forcing everyone to confront what they were seeing. Leavitt noticed it too. The more she pleaded, the more her vulnerability seemed to echo back at her. And so she grew louder, more frantic. "Do you want to ruin me? Is that what this is about?" she demanded, her voice breaking as she tried to mask desperation with indignation. "I've spent my life fighting for what I believe in. And now, you want to destroy it all, over politics? Over pride?" But Crockett still didn't flinch. Not a twitch, not a blink, not a breath out of place. Her silence wasn't passive, it was commanding. She had transformed into the unshakable center of the storm, letting her opponents spiral out of control. The contrast was undeniable, one woman unraveling in public, the other radiating composure, holding the entire chamber hostage with nothing more than restraint. The effect was devastating. Every plea, every outburst from Leavitt only reinforced the imbalance of power. Crockett didn't need to raise her voice, she didn't even need to speak. Her stillness became a weapon. Her refusal to answer became an indictment. And the longer she waited, the more Karoline's desperation grew, twisting into something raw, almost unbearable to witness. Leavitt's words faltered. Her breath came faster, her eyes flickered with the recognition that she was losing control, not just of the lawsuit, but of the very image she had built. She had always been the loud one, the fighter, the firebrand. But here, in this chamber, her voice sounded small against Crockett's silence. For the first time, it was painfully clear, power didn't belong to the one who shouted the loudest. It belonged to the one who could hold steady when everything else cracked. The murmurs in Congress quieted, as though the chamber itself realized something monumental was about to happen. The weight of anticipation pressed down on every shoulder. All eyes locked on Crockett, waiting, bracing, knowing the silence could not last forever. And then, Crockett leaned forward, just slightly, enough to break the stillness, and unleashed a response that cut deeper than any insult. The pause was unbearable. For what felt like an eternity, Jasmine Crockett simply sat there, her gaze fixed on Karoline Leavitt with unblinking calm. The silence itself was surgical, slicing through the chamber louder than any roar of outrage ever could. And then, with a slow inhale that seemed to draw all the air out of the room, she leaned forward, her voice sharp and steady, each word landing like a gavel. "This isn't about me," Crockett began, her tone deliberate, almost icy. "This is about accountability. You don't beg your way out of responsibility. You don't whine your way out of the damage you've caused. And you certainly don't cry your way out of the truth." The chamber froze. Every syllable rang heavy, echoing through the room like a bell toll. Leavitt's lips parted as if to respond, but nothing came. The words had hit her too squarely, too undeniably. Crockett pressed on, not raising her voice, not rushing, just methodically tightening the noose. "For years," she continued, her eyes locked on Leavitt, "you built your brand on tearing people down. You painted yourself as the fighter, the one who could stand up to anyone, who could laugh in the face of consequences. And now, when it's you under the microscope, you want mercy?" A sharp murmur rippled through the chamber. The words "you want mercy" seemed to hang suspended in the air. Some leaned forward, others sat back in shock, hands over their mouths, eyes darting from Crockett to Leavitt. It was the kind of line that cut both ways, devastating and undeniable. Leavitt's face drained of color. Her usual poise, her perfected smirk, had vanished. What replaced it was a pale stillness, as if the mask had shattered and the real weight of her position had settled across her shoulders. She opened her mouth again, searching for a retort, but her throat betrayed her, no sound came. Crockett let the silence linger before continuing, every pause pulling the chamber deeper into her control. $80 million, she said, her voice low and exact. That's not just a number. That's accountability measured. That's the cost of lies, of recklessness, of thinking you can say and do whatever you want without consequences. Flashbulbs burst from the gallery as cameras clicked furiously, capturing the confrontation in real time. Reporters scribbled notes with frantic speed, their eyes wide, knowing history was being written before them. Crockett turned her gaze from Leavitt to the rest of the chamber, her words now cast outward. "And let me be clear," she said, voice carrying, "this is not vengeance. This is not personal. This is justice. If you think you can tear down our institutions, attack the truth, smear your opponents, and then simply ask for it all to disappear when the tables turn, you are mistaken. Accountability doesn't work that way. America doesn't work that way." Gasps filled the room, some quiet, some audible enough to echo against the marble walls. Even those who usually stood in opposition to Crockett leaned back, stunned at the precision of her strike. She wasn't just responding, she was dismantling. Piece by piece, word by word, she was laying bare the hollowness of Leavitt's plea. Leavitt's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the table. Her eyes darted around the chamber, searching for allies, for someone to interject, to interrupt, to save her from the tidal wave crashing down. But no one moved. No one spoke. She was alone. Crockett, steady as stone, delivered the finishing blow. "Karoline," she said, finally using her opponent's first name, slow and deliberate, "you came here today expecting sympathy. You thought a quivering voice and a plea for mercy would erase years of arrogance, dismissiveness, and disregard for the truth. But I am not here to comfort you. I am here to remind you, and everyone else, that actions have consequences. And no amount of begging will change that." The words landed like thunder. A collective gasp filled the chamber, followed by an eerie, weighted silence. Even the clicking of cameras seemed to slow, as though the moment demanded reverence. Leavitt's face turned ashen, her eyes glassy, her jaw trembling. She tried to summon words, but her voice broke before it could form. Her body language said it all, she was crumbling, her once defiant presence collapsing under the weight of Crockett's precision. And then, the silence. That heavy, unmistakable silence. The kind that makes every second stretch into eternity. Crockett didn't move. She didn't smile, didn't gloat, didn't offer even the faintest expression of triumph. She simply held the silence, letting it do the work for her. In that silence, she didn't just win the lawsuit, she won the room. Every gaze, every breath in the chamber shifted toward her. She had seized the narrative, the power, the respect, without raising her voice or breaking her composure. Leavitt, meanwhile, sat in ruin. Pale, shaken, her carefully crafted image undone in front of colleagues, reporters, and cameras broadcasting to millions. For years, she had tried to project strength. But in this moment, she was exposed, fragile, cornered, defeated. The chamber seemed suspended in that breathless aftermath, the weight of Crockett's words lingering in the air, pressing on every shoulder. No one dared interrupt. No one dared shift the attention. It was clear, something larger than politics had just unfolded. And yet, the story was far from over. Because if Congress was stunned, America's reaction would be even bigger. The silence inside the chamber had been deafening, but outside, the roar was instant. Within minutes, clips of Jasmine Crockett's cold, measured counterattack flooded social media. On TikTok, the 15-second snippet where she declared, "You don't beg your way out of responsibility" racked up millions of views in hours, set to dramatic remixes and slowed-down edits with flashing captions, #Crockett clapback and $80 million moment. Twitter, now X, was no quieter. The phrase "accountability doesn't work that way" became the rallying cry of trending threads. Verified journalists, partisan influencers, and everyday users alike latched onto the line as if it had been written for history books. Side-by-side memes appeared, showing Crockett's calm, unflinching stare juxtaposed with Leavitt's pale, trembling face. One woman brought a mirror. The other couldn't look, one viral caption read. Late-night comedians wasted no time. By evening, monologues aired across networks, replaying Crockett's words with comedic exaggeration. One host quipped, "Leavitt begged like she was at a student loan hearing," and Crockett said, "Wrong courtroom, honey." Laughter roared across audiences, further cementing the moment in pop culture. Cable news framed it as a turning point. Conservative networks tried to spin Leavitt's breakdown as unfair treatment, but even some of their commentators couldn't deny Crockett's mastery of the exchange. Progressive pundits hailed it as the line in the sand that congressional decorum had needed for years. For once, one analyst declared, accountability wasn't drowned in noise. It stood firm, and it stood tall. And in the background, Leavitt herself faced an avalanche of ridicule. Hashtags mocking her, #please Jasmine please and #begging on the floor, trended alongside Crockett's surge in popularity. Screenshots of her strained expression became reaction memes, inserted into every context from sports losses to celebrity scandals. "This is the face you make," one post read, "when you realize Crockett doesn't blink." But it wasn't all comedy. Beneath the laughter and memes, there was a simmering seriousness. Commentators across the spectrum began framing the confrontation as more than just a viral moment, it was a litmus test. Could Congress truly begin holding its members accountable in a way that resonated with the public? Could dignity stand its ground in an era dominated by outrage and theatrics? Unexpected allies began to emerge. Figures who had long kept their distance from Crockett, moderate Democrats, even a handful of conservatives weary of political theater, publicly praised her composure. One senator remarked in a press briefing, "What we witnessed was not a partisan win. It was a democratic one." Composure under fire, that's leadership. Meanwhile, Leavitt retreated from the spotlight. Reports surfaced of cancelled appearances, health-related absences, and internal disputes within her camp about whether she should resign. Her allies, once vocal defenders, grew eerily quiet. Some shifted the narrative entirely, speaking not of her but of Crockett's masterclass in restraint. By the week's end, Crockett wasn't just a congresswoman, she was a cultural symbol. Editorials in national papers described her as the calm in the storm and the mirror Congress has long avoided. The Economist ran a piece titled "The $80 million Moment, What Crockett's Silence Taught Us About Power." And yet, beyond the hashtags, beyond the jokes, beyond the think pieces and the endless TikTok remixes, there was something deeper, an unease, a reckoning. People weren't just laughing at Leavitt's humiliation. They were asking themselves questions about accountability in their own lives, about what happens when someone finally refuses to let arrogance go unanswered. The viral storm had shaken the internet. But the real impact, the one that would outlast the memes, was something else entirely. A moral wake-up call. When the echoes of Crockett's words finally settled, it became clear that the moment was never about the lawsuit's dollar figure. The $80 million had captured headlines, yes, but in the chamber, in the silence that followed, what lingered was something far more valuable. Crockett's response reframed the entire confrontation. This was about truth. This was about integrity. And in that arena, no sum of money could sway the outcome. Jasmine Crockett's composure revealed a truth that politics often buries under noise and theatrics: dignity outweighs desperation. In refusing to engage in the tug-of-war of insults or pity, she proved that real power isn't found in shouting louder, but in standing unshaken when chaos swirls around you. Her silence, her steady gaze, her controlled delivery, these were not weapons of attack, but shields of principle. Karoline Leavitt's Unraveling offered the mirror image. In her desperation, she became the embodiment of what happens when ambition outweighs accountability. The plea to drop the lawsuit wasn't just about avoiding consequences, it was an attempt to erase responsibility with words alone. But Crockett's stance showed America what happens when excuses run into a wall of unbending truth. Excuses crumble. The bigger theme struck a chord beyond the chamber. Across households, offices, classrooms, and digital feeds, people found themselves replaying the clash not as political entertainment, but as a lesson. Integrity, they realized, doesn't require performance. Accountability cannot be begged away. And dignity, true dignity, is power. This is why Crockett's moment resonated far past party lines. She didn't need to grandstand, didn't need to raise her voice, didn't need to insult. She let restraint do the talking. And in doing so, she reminded a weary public that politics can still carry moral weight. She turned what could have been dismissed as another viral fight into a teaching moment etched into collective memory. For many, it was more than politics, it was personal. Parents pointed to Crockett's poise as a lesson for their children, that calm courage outlasts temporary victories. Educators replayed the exchange as proof that composure in confrontation can dismantle arrogance faster than rage. Leaders across industries drew parallels, reminding teams that accountability is not optional, but the cornerstone of trust. And through it all, one refrain echoed: composure is power. Not the kind that shouts, not the kind that bullies, but the kind that lasts when noise fades. In reframing the lawsuit as a matter of principle, Crockett delivered a message America didn't expect but desperately needed: that the measure of a leader isn't how much they win, but how they carry themselves when the stakes rise. The viral storm may fade, the hashtags may lose their shine, but the lesson will remain. Because moments like these remind us all, inside Congress and outside it, that integrity cannot be negotiated, and dignity cannot be begged away. One plea. One response. And America saw who truly held the floor. One lawsuit. One cold reply. And a Congress left stunned. The scene will live on not because of the $80 million figure, not because of the desperation that filled the chamber, but because of the woman who stood firm when others cracked. Jasmine Crockett didn't just answer Karoline Leavitt, she redefined what leadership looks like under fire. In a place where noise too often replaces substance, her icy composure cut through like a blade. Calm. Measured. Unmoved. She reminded the nation that strength isn't found in begging for mercy, but in standing tall when the pressure mounts. That accountability, no matter how inconvenient, always outweighs excuses. This was more than a courtroom clash. It was a lesson. A moment that proved integrity still has a voice in politics, and that voice can silence a room without ever shouting. And now, it's your turn to carry that message forward. Backhand index pointing right if you believe accountability beats begging, share this story. Let others see that dignity, not desperation, deserves the spotlight. Backhand index pointing right if you want more true moments where courage silences the noise. Subscribe now. Because this isn't the last time the chamber will test its leaders, and when it happens again, you'll want to witness it here first. One plea. One response. One lasting reminder: real power doesn't scream. It simply holds the floor.